Okay.
Woohoo!
Hello, everybody. This is Two on One, a theological diatribe or triatribe between me, Patty Pancakes, or the Reverend Arthur Stewart, the Burke Queen of Westchester, the Reverend Stephanie Kendall, and a guest. This week is, once again, the Reverend Whitney Waller-Cole out of Flower Mound, Texas, who is joining us for part two of our discussion of Hamilton. No, I'm sorry, that's been the last 3 weeks, of Wet Hot American Summer, this time first day of camp. Welcome back, Whitney.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I would have talked about Hamilton too, but clearly the second, perennial achievement of the 21st century when it comes to drama is what we're talking about today.
It's really good. I really enjoy it. I do. It's stupid and
I love it.
Like I looked at Michael Showalter. He directed the Camille Nanjiani
Big Sick.
Big Sick. Like he's done incredible work, and he also does this.
Yes.
So
which is incredible work. Whoa.
Yeah.
No. But
let's not say things we can't take back.
I wanted to clarify something from the last time we talked about Hot, by the way, if I could. So the whole like having a Catskills comedian come in and I'm so old I slept on a rock. Like there's
arts and crafts. Come on now.
Arts and crafts, more like farts and crafts. There's a level of East Coast Jewish humor that is endangered right now. Like it shifted, and it was so fundamental to 20th century American humor, period. Like everything that was televised grew out of that. And it was kind of like watching a historical reenactor, but it'd be like going to a Civil War reenactment if everyone was ironically doing it. It just kind of blew my mind. And rewatching First Day, I was like, oh yeah, no, that's still there. It never goes into cynicism.
No, it doesn't.
Or stays in cynicism, I don't know.
I feel like it is so earnest in how completely ridiculous and raunchy and unnecessary it is. Like there is a heart at the core of it that I really do feel like Gerald Cooperberg is this entire series and franchise encapsulated. And like the whole time you're like, is this guy for real? He might be, or maybe he's not. Like, yes, I'm with you. It's just charming.
It's charming. And like the whole having the actual tweens, like any plot with them, I'm like, why is this here? But I mean, I understand, and it's the heart at the core of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can talk about that. Pardon Spiff, the diatribe.
No, it's fine. I'm sharing this online. So if you were watching with us right now, please also share online and like and subscribe to all of our stuff. There's our
subscribe.
Who does our entire marketing campaign? This is me saying, hey y'all, go to all the places, do all the things.
You know what? Let me do that right now while we talk too.
So let's go back because so you and I are old school fans. We are influenced by the love of the original movie, as we talked about last time we gathered.
Yeah.
How did you feel when this was like announced, when they were like, okay, we're doing, so for those of you that don't know the premise of, or who didn't watch, the premise of Wet Hot American Summer First Day of Camp is that the movie that came out in 2000 is the last day of camp. It came out in 2000. It was shot in a 28-day span. It was very tight. That covered just that last day of camp. This
rained almost the whole time.
Yes.
Raining almost the entire, yeah. And so this time it's a series. It's an 8-episode series of the first day of camp. So they have more time to tell they have more story time to tell the same amount of time in the time frame of the series, right? It was also shot 15 years after, so they're playing younger versions of themselves 15 years older, which is
well, and so what's especially amazing is Bradley Cooper was an Oscar winner at that point. Had he won already for?
Yeah, I think he won for Silver Linings Playbook.
Silver Linings Playbook,
yeah. So he was like the most recent Best Actor winner, and they worked out shooting all of his scenes in a day because he had to come back to that. And that's also something So I've got 3 questions today, Spiff. I've got
But really quickly, before the question, fun fact.
Yes.
The singing that Bradley Cooper does in this movie was actually his audition for A Star is Born.
Come on.
It wasn't, but what if it was?
That's amazing.
I made the same joke in my head to no one. To when he goes into his, so when he's performing as a straight man and he puts on that southern drawl, I was like, oh, this is where he started with his accent for Star is Born.
Sorry, the whole time I was watching that, I was just thinking to myself, what if that is how that happened? Like, what if
it wasn't Silver Linings? It was what Hot American Summer first.
You're like, I see some real potential there.
When he turns into like southern drawl, where he's like, "Well, how do, little miss?"
Oh my God, we should remake that one movie
like
we keep making.
Yeah, it's so good. But I'm sorry, Arthur, what were your questions? I was
really. You didn't answer my question. What as a fan of the original, what are you doing on the second? Like, how did that? Did you like it? What happened? Like, what's your feels?
So I was super stoked when they announced that they were doing it, and the humor and conceit behind the idea that it is indeed 15 years later and we're just pretending that it's the first day of camp, and that they like try to neatly tie that up with a bow in the last episode when Mitch is handing over the camp to Beth and he's like, you're gonna rejuvenate this place, everyone's gonna be 15 years younger by the time the summer's over. That joke is emblematic of the things that I appreciate about this being 4 entire hours of your life that you're devoting to the first day of camp, is that there is so much time for them to really just go all in on not only connecting back to the movie, but to also add in these new storylines and sort of give you this even wider sense of how ridiculous this is. Now, that being one of the things that I love about it being 4 hours long is also one of the things that is a real struggle in the viewing, because it's, shall we say, shaggy. There are some pieces we do not need whatsoever. There are also some pieces I was really here for. Weirdly, Chris Pine. I mean, not weirdly Chris Pine. Chris Pine, right?
Right.
But so, yeah, there are a few storylines that were great, but there are also other storylines where you know that in like storyboarding this concept and joking about like just how terrible Michael Showalter looks, which is not me making fun of Michael Showalter. When this was released, Michael Showalter tweeted about like, today's the day for everyone to tell me how terrible I look 15 years later. So like that is with love for that for him. But you know that at some point someone said, you kind of look like Ronald Reagan now. And they were like, add it in. Like, I think that the whole process is just so, I don't want to say bloated because that sounds like I'm not here for it, but.
It's also the weird thing, I mean, to jump ahead to a conversation we'll have in God knows how many weeks, more than 5. What will happen with Michael Ian Black imitating Bush in 10 years later? It's fascinating in that their sketch work with the state, they did Reagan and Bush together.
Yeah.
So it might have also just been like, well, we got time to kill. You want to do your Reagan?
Bring that guy back.
Yeah. So it's.
So who is your favorite of all Showalter's characters, right? Because you have, now his name's escaping me, but the comedian at the end, the talented guy who they're like, he's so and so. What is his name? At the end of the movie, not 10 years or not first day of camp.
The Catskills comedian. I can't remember.
Who is your favorite of Showalter's like so not Coop? Who is your favorite of Showalter's characters?
The Catskill comedian.
Alan
100%.
Shumpert.
Alan Shumpert, thank you.
Alan Shumpert. Yeah.
I can't pick Coop. I just.
You can't. You have to pick his secondary characters. I know.
I think it's Patty Pancakes. There's something about that entire relationship with Kevin as a camper, and like that, just that whole exchange really does feel again, like we talked about this the first time with the movie, right? That if you've been a camp counselor, there are parts of the movie that are so painfully true to that experience, even in the hyperbole of them.
It's
And I
very
feel
clear.
like that is one of them.
It's very clear Michael Showalter was a camp counselor.
Oh,
Like,
for
inherently.
sure.
For
Yeah.
sure.
And honestly, the Patty Pancakes thing, I kind of had to do some soul searching with it because it made me tear up the first time I saw it. Like, I was laughing because it's about pans pooping. But also, it reminded me so much of Joe Schaefer that we used to do camp with. And Joe was like the savior of Cairo Camp forever. Joe would have done that in a heartbeat. So.
Oh, for sure he would have.
Yeah. One of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me is he said, I hope I can be like you when I grow up. And I'm like, you're pretty much the closest like incarnation of Christ in the flesh.
He's amazing. He's
God
amazing.
rest his soul. Anyhow, okay. So,
Right. Your questions, Arthur.
well, so I guess this is more of a philosophical thing to begin with. But no, you know what? I want to start with your great question that you said would be the first question last episode, Spiff. What does it mean to have a canon? What does it mean to say the canon is closed? What does it mean to reopen the canon? Because we have that in this. And that's Spiff's question, but mine comes secondarily.
Ooh, I like that question. Well, I think part of what's interesting in thinking about this in terms of canon is that in the original creative material, you start in the middle of the presumed story arc, right? Now, it is obviously evident that this was not a pre-established, pre-thought out prequel to the original material. I mean, at least I don't think it is. And so thinking about that in terms of canon, yes, not only can the canon be reopened, but the ideas of the origin story that we tell in the canon, like we can recreate from the ground up, I think is the premise that's here for them. And at the same time are calling back upon prehistory that predates them, kind of what Arthur was saying about the state and how there are influences that run through here.
And the Mad Men thread that they kept, like the whole party where they're doing the foxtrot, and it's very much a play off.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes it a particularly endearing and enduring like favorite cast of characters and franchise for me with Wet Hot American Summer is that they don't take too seriously the idea that anything is etched in stone or that anything stands on its own. Like, the experience is richer if you know the people that you're interacting with from other places, whether it's John Hamm showing up and, you know, knowing that, or recognizing that Jean is also Elliot Stabler. Like, they exist in a universe where they are all of these things at once.
And it's so complex, it's without rigid definition.
Yeah. And I think that lends itself to you being able to go along with how ridiculous the story is. I mean, it's not supposed to actually be some linear procedural for us, and it's not really supposed to be revealing something grandiose or anything, but at the same time, you do end up connecting in ways that I think are particularly interesting. And I think it's because the canon is open that none of these people or events are truly fixed. Mm-hmm. But they're willing to play around with all of it, which I think is an interesting thing to think about.
Well, so the follow-up in that is, by closing the canon, do you think the church lost its ability to play?
I think we definitely made it harder.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did we lose our ability to play, but I also think that we lose our ability in some ways to have some sense of grace in the ways that we are depicting or painting or choosing to read into who people are. You know, it's one of those things of, I might actually like Paul a lot better if I could see a few more of his letters. Might like him a lot less too, I don't know. But
and Spiff, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to dominate the hosting role. What do you think?
What do I think?
What do you think about everything?
Oh, about all the things, eh? You know, I think that it's important when we talk about this, like, to bring into like the context of like Jewish midrash, that like there's a like that community plays into these storylines and like allows these elaborative, imaginative, really rich commentaries on their holy scriptures to be alive and active in their faith community. And although, you know, their canon is closed, it's not like that, but like I think that there is something there that we see present in these in First Day of Camp and then in 10 Years Later, that really lend to the traditions from which they are kind of built and expressed. And so you know, I think it is important to name that, like, these men those who wrote it and directed and had the kind of the primary vision casters of this world came out of you know, Jewish summer camps, came out of, you know, Jewish families and traditions. And so as Christian leaders talking about, you know, is the canon closed? You know, I love the God is still speaking, you know, don't put a comma sort of conversations about our biblical texts. And I think when we do talk about, you know, this closed canon, we don't allow ourselves prophetic imagination. We do harm to the community that the Spirit is trying to move in and work through and work with. And so I think imagination is part of the responsibility of faith leaders. Mm-hmm. And so this helps me when I feel stuck preaching, because I have just whatever my mind is set up on what my understanding of this passage is trying to do. You know, things like, you know, First Day of Camp can help me can remind myself, like, no, ask the better questions, right? Like, whose voices aren't being heard? What narratives are at work in this story that are not a part of the focus of the text, right? How do we get in between that? And so I think that these really expansive open canon reboots, let's call them, or, you know, a reinvention, a reimagination of them are helpful for our faith leadership.
No, I think that's good. A closed canon doesn't necessarily mean closed creativity,
right?
In the ways that we're able to revisit it. Yeah, for sure.
So speaking of Paul, because I bring it up all the time because I'm studying him right now in 1 Corinthians.
He's sponsored by Paul?
I'm not yet.
You're actually bringing it up. Okay.
But I'm up for it.
2-on-1 sponsored. We're not we're generally sponsored, unofficially sponsored by LaCroix.
Yeah, I can be a much more self-loathing gay if that will help Paul.
I was gonna say, do you think you might be a little too creative to be sponsored by Paul?
So, you know what,
creative in his own way.
So, chapter 11, 2-16 is women need to have their head covered. And God is the head of Christ, and Christ is the head of humanity, and men are the head of women. Or
that's your cue, Steph.
I know.
Do I look 11?
You look 16.
And maybe
I went back to get to 16. You got to go like 8 and 8 or whatever she was trying to say.
So the problem, of course, is every interpretation. But if you read the pericope, he kind of halfway through figures out that his argument's dumb, and he's been egalitarian through the entire letter. And then he's kind of like, but everybody is under Christ. And he's like, you know what? Figure it out amongst yourselves. And he like literally just kind of hedges off to the table. And again, if we could have read more of his letters, I also wish we could go back and be like, dude, people are going to literally write books about this. Could you please be more clear? Pick a better word for arsenicoia.
Right.
like think before you say something, and tell people not to write stuff in your name. Just that kind of stuff. I don't.
Right.
But again, with canonicity and creativity, and I think I had a point, and I forgot what it was as I talked. And excuse me.
Well, I wonder, Arthur, if part of that too is thinking about intention versus impact, right? Mm-hmm. And the ways that we have that conversation from so many different vantage points of necessity is, you know, if we were able to go back and say to Paul, and this is a little bit about what we talked about last time, I feel like too, of, hey, what you've chosen to present here, the impact that that's having may go beyond what your intended impact was. And when you can't have those conversations with people, you know, because they're dead, what does that mean, and what does that do? What are there?
Ouija boards.
See you in 6 weeks. So when you can't have those conversations and you are left to work out the pieces of intention and impact, especially when it has to do with religious communities and the ways that has real adverse effects on people's lives, for people to come in and read Paul and choose that this is the impact of these words that really are for an experience that's completely beyond where we are, I think that puts us in this category of asking what's the responsibility of the creator, and then what's the responsibility of the one who receives that creation, and how you're responding to it. And I think that's a question for art and a question for faith.
And honestly, one of the commentaries was like, you can't walk around this. Like, he says this, but you can absolutely reject it.
Sure.
Just as people can say Wet Hot American Summer is too slapsticky or too raunchy or anything else. But
and yet I think it goes to, you know, intent and reach, right? Like, so Wet Hot American Summer, it has this kind of, for lack of a better word, cult following. It only made, its budget was like less than $2 million, and it made like $300,000, the first movie. And yet its reach went so far beyond that original content that 15 years later, they make an entire series of it, and then 3 years later after that make another movie that, like, you know, that vision cast of these friends just trying to like get their improv friends into a movie, right? Like, that's like what this original thing was, like, hey, let's do this, let's gather everybody, you know, let's get that kid from New York, Bradley Cooper, what's his face, who's just graduating acting school, misses his acting school graduation because he's in the movie. What
is the name of the documentary, by the way? The
Hurricane of Love, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Hurricane of Love, y'all. If you haven't seen it, I think the only place you can still watch it, tried to find it for a while, is on Showalter's like Vimeo. Like, it's it's free. You just like go on it, but like it's not any downloadable place that I could find.
Yeah.
But it's a great behind the scenes of the first movie, making of that first movie, and really what their intent was. Their intent was to make a movie with their friends. It wasn't to make movies. It wasn't to make a real impact on, you know, comedy or anything else that was happening, right? It was just like, we're gonna make this movie with our friends. We want to kick up the dust with our people, right? And 20 years later, we're still talking about it. And it's like theological significance to the impact of the culture, because now people know it. Now, you know, it's weird evangelism, right? It's, what is the point purpose of evangelism? So.
Okay.
All right. Arthur, you had more questions. I took us on an evangelism.
No, I appreciate it. Can we talk about Camp Tiger Claw a little bit and what it symbolizes?
Yes.
Camp Tiger Claw, boo!
Well, and I want to make it clear, too, that, like, part of it is with Camp Tiger Claw, I want to tie it back into the baseball game in Wet Hot American Summer. That because I guess the question I'm trying to formulate is, did they third way it in Wet Hot American Summer, the original, by just being like, yeah, the kids aren't interested, I'm sorry, we're not going to let this culminate into some sort of enormous, you know, I don't know. What do y'all think about Tiger Claw? Wasn't that fun and weird? Isn't Kristen Wiig grows on me every time I see her.
I really like her, but
Camp Tiger
You do
Claw.
like her, or you don't? What did you say, Spiff?
I said I've always liked her.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big SNL person, and so like most people that come up and through, like I have love for my SNL peeps.
Yeah, I appreciate, because I think that was one of the places where the hyperbole of taking these tropes of like summer camp and summer camp movies, and then like just teasing that out to a level of ridiculousness that is truly, I mean, the absurdity of the conversations that you enter into with Camp Tiger Claw, it's a completely different level of that. I mean, the one that's particularly coming to mind right now is as we eavesdrop in on like, Ayn Rand isn't hot. It's like, but her mind. And then he's like, right, but what do women need minds for? And it's, you know, it is like the picture that's giving of misogyny, of a pro-capitalist environment, and what patriarchy means, and the ways that that is mapped over, the more egalitarian approach, I guess, that we're supposed to be seeing at Camp Firewood. I think that all of that adds for me a layer that I think I read and felt a lot differently watching this in 2020 versus watching it in 2015 when it came out. Like in 2015, those were all just really silly, ridiculous statements. And then I was watching it now and I was like,
they're all acting secretaries.
Yeah, it's like there's a weird political commentary happening here.
Once again, the acting secretary of Homeland Security is named Chad Wolf. He very clearly went to Camp Tiger Claw. Like, Chad Wolf. Michael Showalter threw out that name because it was too over the top.
Yeah.
Sorry, we went directly political, but
I watched it. I had that same thing. I watched I think you immediately when you see Camp Tiger Claw, right, and you see like 4 popped collars, like that these people are obnoxious, right? And it's like, and it's Katie's boyfriend, and you're supposed, like, you already go into it like Katie and Coop, right? Like those of us that are fans are Katie Coop people.
Yes.
And the triangle of Katie, Andy, Coop is what we're invested in. And then you have this other dude over there. And so then I'm sitting here thinking, this is the 2020 spiff, watching this again, and I'm like, I wonder what camp would be like if we put them all together, right? Because the idea is like, how do we gain camp insight from getting all these? And then I literally was just like, that's too much to put on these young Jewish campers, like to have to like teach anti-capitalist, like egalitarian, like communal responsibility to each other, like they have been building in their camp, to like then just put on. Because I'm like, I want these like obnoxious Tiger Claw people to learn humility and love and respect, right? But who is responsible for teaching them? Because immediately we want to say like it's the interconnectedness of these 2 camps that may bring them to fruition, right? And like see them to the other side together. And yet I'm sitting here thinking like, nope, that is too much to put on the oppressed. Like that is too much, which is Camp Tigerwood, the poor group, the group that, the group that is looked down upon from Camp Tiger Claw because they don't have jet skis, and Katie's one of us, why is she over there, right? What is that? That's really what took me there. I was like, well, if Katie is learning and growing in this world, are we called to do that on like a bigger scale? And then I was like, no, that's too much to put on these little kids, and to put on marginalized communities and all of that. So.
Well, and it's just, anti-racism needs to be taught by white people to white people. In part, it needs to be drastically informed by BIPOC. Like, please don't get me wrong, but it's not the responsibility of people of color to be like, no, you need to treat me like a human being.
Right.
I mean, yes, it is within their own personal experience, but it's not like, please come to a class full of white people so they can be like, actually, I don't think you're human, or however that works.
Right.
Okay. Wow. Sorry. I took a really good point and I was like, bland oversight.
I love it. Can I hop on to a question about capitalism in the camping system?
Yes. Please.
Only because we're kind of there with Camp Tiger Claw, right? Like the reason Camp Tiger Claw doesn't have the sludge is because they have the money, right? And so Mitch takes on this kind of his understanding of need and sustainability. This kind of this, what's it called? It's
Star.
The what?
Zenstar?
Yeah, Zenstar, but like it's radioactive sludge essentially, or like
it's MacGuffin, yeah.
That they dump into Camp Tiger or Camp
Firewood.
And thank you. All the names are now getting confused. Camp Firewood to like keep it going, right? And so they went to the poor group. They went to, which I think is an interesting conversation about. Never mind. But so what do we have to say about that? I guess how does capitalism inform spaces of community building? How does it how how are we called to push against that, right? Because it's actually hurting, especially when camp, if at least for me and having served camps in multiple places, like camp is like an outdoor God experience generally. Like it's the place where people are like, I see God in the trees for the first time, right? Because especially if you're a little kid who's only grown up in church and you've only experienced God in the pews, right? What does it mean to say, and God is here too? And the only way we can keep that going is through this sludge, this really radioactive toxic waste. So I don't know. I'm wondering, I guess, how you guys felt about that and what you see as the connection there.
You're our guest, Whitney.
So answer first.
Yeah, no.
Oh, I can. I defer to you.
Okay. Well, I have an answer, so I can give one.
Good.
I think that it's a really good question, and it speaks to, so thinking about what you said, Spiff, about, camp is this outdoor God experience, and a lot of what draws us into that experience is that, for a variety of reasons, I think that feels like a more powerful experience than we might have in other places, because it feels like we're in a world that's apart from our regular everyday life. And there are so many metaphors for spirituality and faith that feel particularly apt in that setting. And so for me, the thing that I think is really interesting about it is how that piece of the storyline does detract you from the experience and understanding of this world that is trying to be created for campers, and thinking about like Mitch in those episodes pre-canonization. Killed it.
Killed it.
Have a great night. I'll see myself out. So, but in the episodes, like before Mitch becomes a can of vegetables, and you see the stress and the strain that's present there, I think that's a really big part of what goes into our lives when we're thinking about trying to create spiritual communities anyway, and the ways that the reality of capitalism do indeed filter into our lives, and using capitalism just to think about the reality of economic systems in general, and that we do live in a world where money has been named an essential part of life. And so I think about it, it's that piece of being a pastor and being in a church and wanting to do that with a lot of integrity, and wanting that to be about the spiritual needs of your community, and wanting that to really be filtered through being spirit-led, and how sometimes that butts up against financial considerations and questions and concerns that are a part of the life of your church. And suddenly you are finding yourself asking questions, and this is broadly, but asking questions about ways to rent out your space, ways that you can be looking for different revenue streams, and how committed you are in those revenue streams, partnering with the values and the principles of your organization versus the values and principles of making sure your organization still gets to survive. I think that that's sort of part of this thread. And the other piece of that I hear in, your observations, Spiff, that it's the poorer camp that has this put upon them. I think that it is a reality of capitalism that there are less choices for people with less money. And so the ways that those present themselves, I think, can be more damaging and harmful.
We commodify everything too.
We do.
Everything has to, all this upset with the Postal Service. I think my favorite thing in the world was somebody was like, the Postal Service has posted $91 billion of losses. And somebody's like, we don't say that about the military. Like, It's also a service, and it's not supposed to be profit driven, but like everything has to be profit driven. And I think all three of us have directed summer camps where just to break even, we've had to either have a next to minimal budget or we've had to raise the rates of camp. Because and it's literally just it costs this much to house the kids every day. It costs this much to feed them. And you do need $50 to buy candles at Walmart for small groups or worship or whatever. But the price keeps going up. And of course, I will say this. I live in a neighborhood in Wichita, Kansas, that is represented by a city councilor, as is every neighborhood. There's the Riverside neighborhood to our west, and that's where the church I serve is. And Riverside is this eclectic, egalitarian, kind of hippy-dippy neighborhood. And I live in Midtown. And Midtown has an enormous flour plant, a flour mill, like that provides a third of the nation's flour in it. and it goes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's a salad dressing factory, which, ew, and it smells like rendered salads at times. And I can't help but notice that this factory was zoned and allowed in a neighborhood that has been more ethnically diverse and more economically lower on the scale. And sometimes, as I've heard, people have talked to our city councilors in the past and said, we still exist. Like, why doesn't Riverside ever have to deal with this? And I just felt a little Mitch-ish. Pre-canonization, of course. I want to talk about Mitch for a second because you brought that up, if I may, Spiff, if that's okay.
Please.
So H. John Benjamin kind of came into more prominence between the eponymous Wet Hot and First Day of Camp. It was a very lucky thing for it. So number one, I learned that Mitch is based on the actual director of Camp Firewood, or where they filmed the movie, and it was kind of a tribute. Camp Tawana. So it was like this weird tribute thing. Two, I guess this is really more on cameos or the new characters of the new cast. What does it mean to make room for new voices, new characters, new movements within, I won't call it a canon, but I'm going to call it the church within a story? What does it mean to have, I forget what the California drummer's name, Jason Schwartz. Is that it?
Jason Schwartzman?
Yeah.
Jason Schwartzman. What does it mean to have him and H. John Benjamin and all these folk?
Kristen Wiig. I mean, John Hamm. They brought in lots of people.
Michael Cera, which was strange, and
he's that guy.
okay.
You know, the guy, Jim Stansel.
Which is, I'm sorry. So I'm just going back for a minute. That is when I watched this 5 years ago. That is the moment I did a spit take in my home when I realized that then the idea in the first Wet Hot was that they didn't want to say who Jim Stansel was. He's just that guy because he dies, because he gets shot, and they'd gone through that. And it's you remember he's that guy, and that they built the pre-joke into this latter movement in such a way that made me go these are my people. You know, I was that is so brilliant.
And there's such care, and maybe he was actually killed in the writing in 2000 or 1999, but also they know the story well enough where they're oh, let's do that. That'll be fun.
Well, that's what I was, so think that observation, Spiff, and then Arthur's question. So for me, it's that there is so much love for this story and what they've created together, and that is so clear in these very small moments of pinpointing a joke, and whether that's pinpointing a joke that they had pre-planned, and I think for me it feels more like going back and reliving the story and figuring out how you work your way back to who these characters would be that are a part of that story to get to where you were, and then thinking forward to Wettest Hottest with the final installment, that characters that will be. And so I think about that in the life of church. And when we're at our best in making space for new folks, that's with a recognition that past, present, and future are always interacting with each other, and that's something we should be striving for. You know, that's a declaration of health in a community, that the story can be told with a mind towards the past, and that those pieces still have these through lines that run with it and that you can pick up on, even if you're brand new to the story. You know, it's having the people within your church who we don't just talk about referencing offhand with an assumption that you would know who the, forebears of your church are, but actually
BMW is going to meet at the ROC because of the NTA BBQ taking place at CBW as we listen to DMB in my BMW.
Right. And if those are the ways that we're talking about, one, if we're just using these acronyms that we come up with for everything, and that's the way we're talking about it, when somebody actually asks us to stop and slow down and explain, well, what are those things? Why are they that way? 9 times out of 10, we can't actually do that effectively or successfully.
Mhm.
However, if we're telling that story from a place of love and care where it's intricately known, then people don't actually have to stop and ask us. Or when they do stop and ask, it's a story that they're being invited into and feel like they're a part of. And I think that's important in the life of church. Because one of the things that we don't always do well as church is look to what the future looks like and plan that in the present moment with how we're including and involving people. So that was one of the things that I appreciated on the rewatch, was realizing how many of these characters that are introduced in this one I actually really found really endearing. And it wasn't only the characters that I had a reference point for because of their work outside of this. There were even, new characters that are brought in. A lot of the child actors that they had and some of the storylines there, I thought that those were just really remarkable and fun. And so I think that that was neat to be able to see that even if there was no baseline with that person, I still felt invested in that character.
Because I can't remember what happened to the Israeli.
Yaron?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Yaron?
Yeah.
Yaron.
Yaron. I think that he and Donna just like sail away into bliss or whatever because Coop breaks up with Donna because he realizes it's not worth his integrity. But also, can we just talk about how David Wayne's legs are like incredible in this movie? And when he's doing the stick thing, I could not help but just think like, okay, David Wayne is one of the few who has like the reverse aging down, which is such a terrible commentary that on like me that's a thing that I'm noticing. But there are a few people where you're like Paul Rudd. Also, you're just like
Paul Rudd has an age.
Paul Rudd from Clueless to Avengers Endgame, same human.
Yeah.
There's a portrait of him somewhere that is horrible. Like it's just locked up in the attic of his house, and someday he'll slash it and end up stabbed. It's fine.
Yes, he is the modern day Dorian Gray. That's exactly what this is like. But yes, so that was what happened to Yaron. But I was very tickled by like, okay, David Wayne.
So,
but it's a matter of like living the story versus telling the story, and like why it's important to engage from several like avenues of kind of theological depth and exegetical like kind of work, right? Like what's your
right.
endpoint in very different ways. One of my favorite things to do because of my background, I mean, we're taught this, but I think I brought it to my own ministry from my background in marketing, is like who's telling the story and who are you telling it to, right? And so like part of the movie, part of Wet Hot American Summer in and of itself is that like you are the audience, it is just for consumption because you have no other pinpoint, you have no other point of reference to get back into it, right? Or first day of camp, first of all, it's a longer period of time, so it feels more invested, like you're living into it with them rather than being told this story. And so part of what I think we are called to do as interpreters of scripture is to find out like what those endpoints are and how they get us to essentially either Christmas or Easter, right? Because those are like the two cycles that we're getting into. Yeah. And so like, Christmas and Easter is very much the movie, right? Like the canon here, here's what you know, here's the good news of Wet Hot American Summer on these two occasions. And
let's talk about Judas Iscariot and why the pink candles for joy. Yeah.
Right. And so exactly. And then regular time and or Advent, and it is kind of more on the first day of camp and or 10 years later, where it's like we're filling in these gaps for you, and it's important to do so because the several entry points into the narrative are going to be different for all of us, and that's important to kind of like hold gently and expose.
So, and I think to build on that, if I may. What's that?
I had a question there. It was more just me like.
It's great though, because can we talk about how like the church is inherently uncool? And sure. I don't know what
I'm talking about, but
well, I mean it as like
I'm a Dundee because church is cool.
It's the there's a campiness to church. There's an intentionality, and the most accessible Batman franchise as Batman made in the 1960s, which I would love to talk to somebody about on this very show. But it's accessible because it's
Hit us up.
yeah, it's both it's ground level and or there's layers of it. Like Animaniacs, there's some jokes that are meant for kids and there's some that are not meant for kids, and there's layers, right? And the church is called to do layers, but I've discovered in an attempt to be relevant, some aspects of the church have tossed out the campiness for the sake of being like deep or cool or sharp or whatever. And it's like, I don't know about y'all, but I need trays of deviled eggs at like church potlucks. I need people to mess up reading scripture on Sunday mornings. I don't know. I think there's a question in there. What does it mean to have campiness in church? What does it mean to have campiness in faith?
I mean, one of the biggest questions that my final year of seminary was me asking every test. Like I was like, this is going to be my question, right? And my question was, what makes God laugh? Because I don't think we laugh enough in worship or just in our faith writ large. Like, how often do you see yourself laughing with tears and notice that is a form of prayer? Or like, in all of those types of things. And so that, I think that ties to the campiness of it all. Like the draw, like, ooh, y'all know I love me some good costumes. Like I love to get dressed up. 3 years ago when the Met Ball was the religious, like it was whatever the religious kind of theme was to it. Yeah. It was, and I went to the Met and like there were these like copes that were like glittered and like the beautiful leather shoes and giant hats, and I was like, girl, this is these are my people. I like took pictures. I was like sending it to like a friend of mine who's a tailor. I was like, what's it gonna cost to make this? And because I think it'd be cool and beautiful and fun, and yet it would be so inappropriate for me to show up in my space dripping in gold and and being like,
but we take ourselves so seriously.
Because we take ourselves so seriously, and we take this vision of what is ours to do and what is ours to have as like these rigid rules, and so I think the campiness of this and the campiness of church writ large is something that is sacred and holy, and we should lean into more than not.
So may I share my professional wrestling drag show, magic show theory of the table with y'all?
Yes.
Okay. And actually, Whitney, it was Doug who introduced me to Chikasa. I never say their word right. It's the amateur professional wrestling. It's, luchador masks. This is some gym they've rented out wrestling. But what Chikasa does is like, it's my favorite clip. I've shown it. Actually, I showed it in my search and call interview with Riverside. I sent them an email with the link to it. Because it's like, oh no, he's invoking slow motion. And then the wrestlers are like, both of them. And then at one point they get pinned, and it's incredible physical work, right? Like the way they're moving and holding on to one another. And in the pin, and you hear the crowd going 1, 2, like in unison. So there's that beautiful idea of like, you have to participate in order for the campiness to work. You have to play along with Patty Pancakes. You have to do this kind of thing. It's drag shows. It's that it's a man dressed as a woman claiming to be Judy Garland, but also it's Judy Garland. It's both at once.
It's the call to suspend disbelief. Right? I mean, like the suspension of disbelief is like what we all need to lean into. If
the suspension of disbelief, the same thing as trust or faith.
Well, I think that they're all. I think that they can be. One of the things. Okay, so here's when I was watching again. I was like, okay, so when Gene or what's his name? God, what's his name in this? It's
Jonas Jurgensen.
Yes, thank you, Jonas Jurgensen.
You're good with names, Whitney.
You are good with names. I'm terrible at them.
Steel trap over here.
Jurgensen.
When he's looking for Victor, when he's gonna kill Victor, and Victor is hiding on the coat, or like the towel rack in the bathroom. They've got him, and it's like an old Bugs Bunny trope, right? Where you open the door and you don't see him, and you look beyond. And as I was watching it, and this is like God's honest truth, I was like, this is what so many of our Bible stories would look like if we told them in like if we set them to like imagery of like characterization, right? Like if we acted out exactly what was happening as the scripture reads, and yet we don't need to, right? And so like there's that part of the campiness, the funness of it that like we have taken out of church. And this is just me going back to like the real ridiculousness of people missing each other or not seeing each other, or touching Jesus's hem and him knowing exactly that someone touched him, and things like that. That's just like,
well,
the world, and yet we believe it. So why would we not believe this world too?
My favorite is still Jonathan, and the Jonathan and David cycle of, I will shoot an arrow, and if it lands far away and I say to the boy, go and fetch the arrow, then you know not to come home for 3 days. And David's like, or you could just say it out loud. Sorry.
No.
I get so excited, Steph. But yes, we miss out when we don't embrace the campiness.
Well, and I was going to say that I think that trust is a prerequisite for a suspension of disbelief to truly be possible, to your question, Arthur, right? So if we're supposed to come into a space and suspend our disbelief, which can also, I think in religious spaces, sometimes be, taking the pen out of the doubt that we might be walking in with, or the baggage that we have. I think that disbelief can code for a lot of different things in a faith community, but we have to have established a trust that lets someone know that they're safe doing that. So
is trust given or built? I'm sorry. When I talked about, when I talked about, okay, never mind. What I do in these pretty regularly is if I don't, okay, Batman, thank you. Took me a second. We have a little chat going because I was confused. What I do is if I don't freeze up, I like to just scatter thumbtacks around as we dance around barefoot. And my apologies, friends. So we are coming up. I want to respect your time, and I want to respect our time, and make sure we get to our final question, which will be an interesting one. But are there, Spiff, I'm sure you have one more question about this. Because I do.
No, why don't you go? I mean, we've hit most of mine.
So what they do is they listed hierarchically, not hierarchically, they listed the people who are in the first movie first in the credits. So even though like H. John Benjamin and Jason Schwartzman had substantially larger parts than like David Hyde Pierce, they got lower billing. When we talk about canonicity, when we talk about apostolic leadership, when we talk about the first 350 years of the church versus the rest of it, like why does Augustine rank higher even if we've walked past it? Why do we still listen to? No, not why do we still listen to, because we don't have to. I had a better question, but I didn't write this one down. Never mind.
What?
So in hearing the part of the question you asked.
the vague seedling, yes. Except for thumbtacks.
Well, no, I think that that's I didn't notice the credit piece, and I think that that's really interesting because for me, it's that balance of, what is it that we owe to those who came before so that we might exist now, even if that existence is, something that's completely beyond what they could have ever imagined or anticipated. But then also, how are we perhaps seeing that our own creativity or possibility or future story is, disadvantaged by the ways that we might be hemmed in by those folks that came before us. So I think about, your question takes me back to like a systematics class and how I have to sit and read Augustine and Origen so that I can then read Kathy Tanner and Miroslav Volf. And can you tell that I went to Yale? Because those are my professors and they made me read their books. But But thinking about how really like
Corpusculant.
what
Corpusculant.
um I'll find a few more $5 words over here in my bag. But I think about that because I do recognize that I would have a harder time navigating the theological frameworks if I didn't do the reading of those folks that came before. And at the same time, I lament that there are probably people who are having equally, if not more, transformative theological thought at the time of these other thinkers who just weren't preserved in the same way for us to lift up the reverence of those thoughts. It's thinking about when you go and look at like 13th, 14th century folks and thinking about the emphasis that you see put on some folks. And then there are other thinkers of knowing that, like, I could tell you a lot of things that Meister Eckhart said, and I think that he has lots of really foundational things that are worth thinking about. But then I also think about some of the mothers of the church at the same time, who I have to dig a lot deeper to hear what they're thinking, and that's thought that actually would be a lot more formative for this moment. And so wondering if we'd be at this moment sooner, if those had been the voices that we were giving primacy to. I think that it's worth considering.
Well, I mean, and congregationally or smaller within the realm of the church or lowercase c church, what does it mean to have a founding charter on the wall? What does it mean to have I served a congregation where I assume my portrait is hanging up now on the wall of white guys who, incidentally, number 8, a woman. Good job. But what does it mean to, within legacies, what does it mean to say, well, Dave started doing this program and Dave left and we loved Dave? Well, okay, but can we try something new, or is that disrespectful? Or I agree with you.
I mean, that goes back, I think, to our conversation with Legacy and Shanna Stites and the U.S. Women's National Team. Like, there are people that love soccer only because of Mia Hamm and can't get behind Kristen Press, or those coming before us. And I think it's a lack of our understanding and ability to hold two things in tension and two things in love at the same time, right? Like it moving into something else for a lot of people says that we don't love whatever this thing was that we left behind. And I think that the imaginative process, I don't know where we're going with all of this, but it is holding those two things together. Yesterday, Dr. Ebony Marshall-Turman, let's talk about Yale apparently, but she had posted something where she had cussed in it, and someone wrote back to her saying, aren't you a pastor? That's right. She said that, she can hold her word was, she holds the interdigitation of the sacred and the profane, which I thought it was such a beautiful turn of phrase. And that is a part of her fundamental understanding of God at work in the world, right? And I think for me, why we can talk the theology of wet hot is that, we have that understanding of the sacred and profane as interwoven as part of God's whole creation, which is part of, I think you can say the same thing for firewood and tiger claw. You could say, that there's lots of those things in which holding the sacred and the profane and naming the sacred in expansive ways and the profane in expansive ways is.
So therefore, they inform each other almost. That tension is really all we can live on. I do want to tell the Yale story, the corpusculant story, because I love it. If I can, will that embarrass you, Whitney? I don't.
I'm beyond embarrassment at this point in my life.
There's
far too many Facebook videos.
It was wonderful because getting ready for a camp, Tiff Williams was asking the youth ministry.
Shout out Tiff Tiff.
What's that?
I said shout out Tiff Tiff.
Oh yeah, Tiff, anytime, call us.
Yeah, Tiff was all together in camp.
Tiff was like, what are other kinds of light? And, kids were like, fire and neon. And at one point, some kid goes, like when the sun is shining from behind a cloud. And Whitney goes, yeah, crepusculant. And without missing a beat, Tiff goes, okay, thanks, Yale. And it was, because I don't attribute that to Yale, Whitney. I attribute that to the fact that you're a very intelligent, well-read human being.
I did know that word before I went to Yale. So.
Precisely. But it was just also kind of marvelous, and it made my heart happy. And because you laughed too, that made my heart happy.
Yeah.
Well, I know that we have 8 minutes left, so should we get to our final question?
I think we should. Travis, you're on vacation this week. Where's our song?
Where's our song, Travis? Okay, so first person goes. Guest goes. So Whitney, what biblical character or story or overarching theme are you reminded of most in the characters and or story of Wet Hot American Summer First Day of Camp?
So there were many avenues that I felt like I could go this time. I will say Arthur shouted out one possibility for me. I was getting some real Jonathan David vibes from McKinley and Ben.
Oh.
Not out there. So that's worthwhile for me. I thought that was kind of fun. I think though that the one that as I was watching and sort of thinking through all of these things, the one that really stuck out for me was with Chris Pine's rock star character. I feel like there was a real Saul to Paul moment that happens there, a very Road to Tarsus piece of, leaning into the life that you thought was yours and finding yourself completely wrecked by that. But then there's an opportunity for transformation that ends up bringing opportunity and possibility to lots of other people, until you are unsanctimoniously killed by the government. So, that was
wow.
That was it for mine. I also really just needed to afford us one more opportunity to talk about just how hot Chris Pine is and how I'm really glad that they pitched this idea to him like at the height of his career. And he said, yes, I would love to pretend to be a washed up rock star in an abandoned cabin. I thought you'd never ask.
We don't talk about what's in that cabin. Well, and I also think that, we didn't talk about this, and we can talk about it next time, but what does it mean? What does separation of church and state mean in the large form narrative that is literally all about government infiltration of this one Jewish summer camp in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
In Maine. In
Waterville. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, that's a whole other.
It is. That's a thing, right? So,
yeah.
Fascinating.
You want me to go or you want to go, Arthur?
I'll go. Melchizedek. I'm hardcore obsessed with the priesthood of Melchizedek because it's like, I was just like, oh yeah, I'm also talking to other people, and you can't take yourself too seriously, and you do not have a monopoly on the truth, nor on goodness or badness, because Melchizedek is totally a priest of the Most High, and we have no idea who the hell he is, or where he came from, or what he does. But he was like, "What's up, Abram? I'm way ahead of you." Like, it's the first day of camp. They don't take the story seriously, and that's what makes it inviting. And it's not just their story. It's that. Or I'm going to tie it into Colossians and Ephesians, in that it's disputed because it is intentionally reminiscent of the eponymous movie, and it is intentionally inventive and re-presenting and redefining and in a different format.
Nice.
Ooh, that makes 10 years later the pastoral letters.
There you go. As I learned from a journalist friend, some stories have chapters.
What? Spiff, you look like 10 years younger.
Wow, you look.
How did you do that?
I also wanted to show with barbecue sauce all over my face, but I don't have barbecue sauce.
Well, we're doing the third installment in costume.
Absolutely.
This is the advance notice.
You taste like burgers. I don't like you anymore. Spiff.
So what I had Mitch as Moses because he's got this like kind of casting vision for his people, trying to get them all there. Doesn't quite make it because he makes some kind of crappy deals on the back end. And yet the legacy and his canon of many forms, the canon and the can, and the many forms of Mitch continue to live on and influence the camp today. So I had a real Moses-y vibe. But then I was like, I always kind of am just like, where's this? Not growing up in church, I will fully admit and talk about all the time how of the Godhead, the Spirit was the one that I least understood. It was harder for me to talk about. I now serving a primarily Black community. It is a part of the language of our liturgy that I find most inspired. I'm now like a big proponent of the Spirit and things. And for me, so I'm always like, where's the Spirit? You know, where? But I thought of the show, the Electric City. That Electric City is kind of the new creation and the Spirit. Like there's a bit of like allowing everyone to show up and grow. It informs certain ways of their personality, but it changes throughout, and it's this kind of this thing that moves with everyone and helps them get to the characters they need to be, right? Like it's especially around like Ben. Like you have Ben who's with Lindsay at the beginning, and you know going into it, like Ben and McKinley are married, you know, in your head, going in the world. So how did they get there? And when in episode 1, when Ben and Lindsay are together, and you're like, or no, it's
Susie.
Susie, thank you. I was like, it's not Lindsay, it's Susie. But when Ben and Susie are together, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And then, but Electric City comes in and helps, and
the zoot suit.
And the zoot suits, and you know, and
do you remember when Brian and I did the zoot suit song at our wedding, Whitney? Wasn't that nice?
It was beautiful.
Just kidding.
So anyway, you're so creative, Arthur. Anyways, that whole thing was, I was like, there's something of the Spirit at work and the creation that is within Electric City, even though the premise of that musical makes me cringe, and like the whole thing I hate so much. As someone who loves musicals and loves Wet Hot, I was like, I hate this with my whole heart when he gets electrocuted, and I'm just like, I can't. But yeah, there's something there about the kind of circle of creation that's really that allows the Spirit to move these characters from one to the other. So
I like that. I do. I think that.
We get these little glimpses of the new creation. We are out of time. Whitney, I want to thank you very much for being our guest. The Reverend Whitney Walner Cole.
It's always so fun.
Whitney is the senior pastor of Creekwood Christian Church in Flower Mound, Texas.
That's true.
And Spiff, I know we have a couple guests coming up. Can you just give us a preview of the next 2 episodes?
Of the next 2 episodes, I'm going to give you the next 5 because I have them written down right here. Just because, why not? Next week, we have Dan Livers, who is coming out of Colorado, and we're going to talk about the Avett Brothers, and specifically their interview on the Armchair Expo, Armchair Expert podcast. So anyways, so we've got that. Then we have Sarah Brown, who was a contestant on Jeopardy, and we're going to talk about Jeopardy the week after that. Then we have Christian Brownies, Charles Anthony Bryant, and Aaron Wathen. All incredible pastors doing some wonderful work. So can't wait. If you want to be a guest, hit us up. Let us know what you want us to talk about, and come on our show.
Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, 2on1 Project. You can email us at 2on1project@gmail.com. Whitney, we will see you again for wettest, hottest American summer when we talk about 10 years later at, well, hopefully not 10 years later, Waka Waka Waka.
I will make it my beeswax to be there. Thank you.
I've got a trapper keeper full of appointments. I'm going to stop the live stream. And there we go. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.